In 1973, James Bond was going to look very different, and yet try to be as familiar as possible after several years of yo-yo casting decisions. Would this film bring back some stability to the series that was now up to its 8th film without going for a reboot? Live and let die. If you've been watching our James Bond reviews and talking about Sean Connery departing the James Bond series and then coming back and then leaving again, it might seem like Groundhog Day. But by 1973, he was gone for good, which in Bond terms is 10 years. Okay, so no Connery meant a new lead actor, and no unknowns this time either. Despite a brief flirtation with the idea of Burt fucking Reynolds playing Bond for this film, some semblance of sanity prevailed, with recasting a role so synonymous with Connery that the way forward meant going with someone very different, but still perfect. Roger Moore had been the obvious suggestion to play Bond for years, since he had played the debonair adventurer Simon Templar on the hit TV series The Saint throughout the 1960s.
May I present the infamous Simon Templar?
When Connery first left, Moore was still contracted to The Saint, and so George Lazenby was cast, and then The Saint was duly cancelled. When Diamonds Are Forever was in production, Moore was busy on the TV series The Persuaders, and so Connery came back for one more film, and then The Persuaders was duly cancelled. So maybe it was destiny, or maybe destiny is just a real asshole. But finally, for Live and Let Die in 1973, Roger Moore was free, and ended up making the role his own, where he would go on to play the role for 7 movies over a 12-year period. Sean Connery was 41 when he relinquished the role in 1971. I mean, your wife was still thinking of Connery, but it took a second Pims to get things really rolling. Born 3 years before Connery, Moore was a youthful-looking 46 years old when he took on the role. He's like Dorian Gray, but there's a knitting catalogue in Moore's attic that bore the full brunt of the march of time. The original Ian Fleming book Live and Let Die would be what we would now call problematic, and even in the 1970s there would need to be some careful rewriting to make the film palatable to modern audiences, and also tailor the role to Roger Moore's more easygoing manner.
Oh, a snake. I forgot. I should have told you should never go in there without a mongoose.
Oh, I should have never gotten into any of this.
So the tone of Fleming's book would modulate between insulting dialogue and patronising stereotypes, a trait the filmmakers were determined to avoid.
Got obvious you weren't coming out front. Not even with that clever disguise you're wearing. White face in Harlem. Good thinking, Bond.
In the early 70s, you had a wave of what became known as blaxploitation movies, becoming huge successes, with the biggest being Shaft.
Please don't be up here asking why you threw that son of a bitch out the window.
Something you'll note throughout most of the 70s Bond movies is that they always have one major element that tries to tap into the zeitgeist, at least as far as Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman were concerned.
You headed into Harlem, man.
Well, you just keep on the tail of that jukebox and there's an extra 20 in it for you.
Hey, man, for $20, I'll take you to a Ku Klux Klan cookout.
In Live and Let Die, 007 is sent to New York to find out why people investigating Caribbean leader Dr. KANANGA are being murdered. KANANGA is the president of SAMEDI, and somehow linked to Harlem-based gangster Mr. Big, despite the fact Mr. Big and KANANGA look almost identical, and they both seem to have the same young woman hanging around. The similarity is uncanny, and they're never in the room at the same time. Oh.
My name is... James is for tombstones, baby. Y'all take this honky out and waste him, now.
Waste him. Is that a good
The
thing?
reading is over.
Solitaire has the sight, and can tell the future by using tarot cards so long as she remains a virgin. I know for a fact that tarot is complete bullshit, since many years ago I briefly worked as a pawnbroker, and a regular customer turned out to be a mystic who read cards for people and told them their future, yet somehow couldn't predict that the phone bill was due on the first of each month. Bond saunters into SAMEDI, tricks Solitaire into sleeping with him, which robs her of her power, and then the rest of the film is an extended series of chases. A chase on a double-decker bus, a chase on an airfield, and a speedboat chase through the Louisiana Bayou. It sounds trite, but it's actually a lot of fun. But, like a Mix-a-Lot video, there is a big but. Sheriff J.W. Pepper, a stereotype of a redneck sheriff who's apparently there for comic relief, but instead makes a modern viewer tense up like someone about to have a syringe plunged into their eye. Bond often comes off as a charming buffoon for the early part of the movie, but he's still meant to be a hero. The lighter touch that was Moore's strong safari suit is blown out of the water by the inane shit sandwich that is J.W. Pepper. In a film that's already quite light in tone, J.W. Pepper is easily the most unnecessary comic relief scene in any Bond film, and he was thought popular enough to bring back in the next film. Now that's a shitty shit sandwich.
You call my brother-in-law Billy Bob, he got the fastest boat in the whole damn river. Billy Bob sure enough fix their ass. Ah, here, go Billy Bob.
Bond faces off against Mr. Big, who, surprise surprise, is KANANGA after all, wearing a mask. And later on, Bond faces off against KANANGA again, this time making him swallow a compressed air bullet so that, look, okay, Po Body's nerfed. Now, you could be forgiven for thinking you're watching a Get Smart movie. Such was writer Tom Mankiewicz's proclivity for humour, as well as returning director Guy Hamilton egging him on. So while some of it doesn't work, most of it at least does.
On the first wrong answer from Miss Solitaire, you will snip the little finger of Mr. Bond's right hand.
Yaphet Kotto makes an excellent villain, whose plot isn't to take over the world, but merely flood the market with cheap heroin in order to drive competitors out of the market and then jack up the prices. These days we'd call that disruptive and put money into his Kickstarter.
I know who you are, what you are, and why you have come. You have made a mistake. You will not succeed.
Jane Seymour as Solitaire is luminous. She's vulnerable and yet seems to be quite thirsty after Bond has introduced her to his favourite hobby.
It's the time before we leave for lesson number 3.
Absolutely. There's no sense in going off half-cocked.
Rather uniquely, Live and Let Die has a more interesting cast of supporting characters than you'd usually find. M and Moneypenny are back, but no Q. David Hedison appears as Bond's CIA pal, Felix Leiter.
A genuine Felix Leiter.
And KANANGA's henchmen are an interesting lot. Tee has a mechanical arm. Rosie Carver poses as a CIA agent sent to help Bond.
But you couldn't. You wouldn't. Not after what we just done.
I certainly wouldn't have killed you before.
Whisper is as quiet as someone speaking really softly, and Baron Samedi is just freaky. Live and Let Die, with its occult elements, is the only Bond film to date to ever have a supernatural element, which was a very fashionable thing in the late 60s and early 70s.
The cards say we will be lovers.
And Roger Moore is Roger Moore. He's not trying to play a poor man's Sean Connery, as George Lazenby attempted. By now, Moore had this debonair adventurer shtick down pat. Moore's Bond is a lot more polished, and you accept him walking around in a dinner jacket a lot more easily than his predecessors. To introduce the new Bond, Roger Moore is just there. Seen for the first time in his apartment, making coffee for M on his own coffee machine.
Is that all it does?
Which would have been a really big deal for somebody in 1973. A coffee machine in one's home was the air fryer of its day. Other than innovative items in Bond's house, a Magnavox Odyssey, one of those weird phones with the dial underneath, and one of the finest private collections of French erotica on 16mm film in the country.
You see, by pulling out this button, sir, it turns the watch into a hyper-intensified magnetic field, powerful enough to even deflect the path of a bullet.
Moore's Bond not only carries off the one-liners better, but he's different in other ways. He smokes cigars rather than cigarettes, never orders a martini for himself, and he's the only Bond to never drive an Aston Martin on screen. Paul McCartney wrote a theme tune that became one of the few hit Bond songs on the charts, with his former Beatles producer George Martin writing the movie's score instead of the usual stalwart John Barry. Martin brings a different but relatively contemporary feel, completely unlike that of Game of Thrones. Hamilton's direction isn't as tight as Peter Hunt's, but it does the job relatively well. But if you're of the school of thought that hates the lighter feel of 1970s Bond films, this video won't change your mind. Hamilton and his team have created a lot of memorable moments and imagery in this film. The jazz funerals, the crocodile farm, and both Solitaire and her card tricks all linger, like an itch that requires strong antibiotics. The film was a hit. It set up Moore as Bond for a long time, solidified the lighter tone of the series, and ensured that we would be getting Bond films for a long time to come. Subscribe, like and subscribe. Also leave a comment and watch some more vids.